Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Can you all hear me okay? Great. So actually, Chris, let me just start first with the title, because I found it really interesting, the global head of new flows. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about new flows and the perspective that you have from Visa. What are these new flows?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for having me. Great to be with you all this morning. To let you in on a little bit of Visa news that isn't quite ready for PR yet, and my PR team might kick me for this. We will be renaming or rebranding New Flows, and it'll become clear why as I talk about this. So, New Flows, if you think about Visa, New Flows is sort of one minus what we do in consumer credit and consumer debit, which is sort of the core payments business that Visa has been known for 40 or 50 years. And in the New Flows businesses that I lead, we're seeking to bring that same security, reliability, transparency, speed, et cetera, to a bunch of payment flows that aren't, frankly, new to the world, so they're not new to the people in this room. It's more that they're new to us, to really participate in, more broadly than we do today, in commercial B2B payments, in government payments, in a whole set of what actually probably are new money movement use cases around the world, be that P2P or more digitally enabled cross-border remittances. And then we have a series of FX and treasury capabilities that we've also brought under this New Flows. And we have to settle on the right name and make sure we run all the legal traps, but I think the more helpful market-facing and client-facing terminology would be something like commercial and money movement solutions that bring together, as I say, a set of capabilities to help corporates, small businesses, gig economy, marketplaces, and workers, migrant workers going cross-border, et cetera, to help them move money and make payments.
Yeah, great. So I know some of my members might be thinking, and they may not say out loud, this is a banking association.
Yeah.
How is our opening speaker not a banker? And I think part of that is the theme of this conference is dancing with disruption, right? And Visa certainly is an important part of the ecosystem that is evolving and being disrupted today. How do you see the term disruption? What does that mean within Visa and retooling for success? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, maybe I'll step back. It's a great question. I think that we're blessed, although there's some anxiety that comes along with it. But I think we're mostly blessed to be, all of us in this room, in business during an era of astonishingly rapid change and transformation. So I think disruption is a great theme for your conference. I guess my prediction is it'll be a great theme for your conference in 2 years' time as well. We're in the midst of what I'd argue is the fourth industrial revolution, right? If the first one was steam power and the second was electric, and those really changed the pace and scale of human production. The third industrial revolution was the first information technology and electronics revolution, which was probably 50, 60 years ago, really started. By the way, Visa is a company that's a product of that third industrial revolution, right? The ability to pay electronically and displace cash was a product exactly of that third industrial revolution. We're in the fourth, I believe, industrial revolution, which is the digital revolution, where the digital world, the physical world, the biological world are converging. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about how do we create enough ambidexterity in the businesses that we run so that we can serve today's clients incredibly effectively, as well as serve tomorrow's clients. And that's much easier said than done. But I spend a lot of time with my team thinking about how do we serve both sets? How do we serve clients who operate in data centers, and how do we serve clients who are cloud native? How do we serve clients who want sort of traditional messaging connectivity to us, and how do we serve clients who want to connect via API, et cetera? And so it's a real challenge, and I think the way to get there is to make sure you've got the right talent and really the right culture to make sure you're really pushing yourselves in new ways.
Yeah. So I can't let you leave without talking about sort of the news of the day, right? So, I think all of us have been conscious of the disruption that's affected us with certain banking closures or with consolidation or things like that. Tell me what your thoughts are about how this audience ought to be thinking about issues of resilience, issues of optionality, and things like that.
Yeah, so I've been at Visa for 3 years, and before that, I had a 15-year career in banking, consumer, small business, and commercial banking. So, as I'm sure is true for everyone in the room, resilience is a topic that I've thought a lot about, over the years. I'm not sure I have advice for this august crowd, but I can tell you at least how I think about it, which is, resilience is really about being in the long game, the longest game you possibly can. And it's incredibly challenging to do that. All of us, or almost all of us, operate in public companies, and there's an incredibly strong gravitational pull to the short term and to things that have really quick payoffs. And some of the things you're going to do for resilience, might never pay off in the sense of the event might not happen. But being prepared for those events, I think, is the way to be assured for the long term. That it's not enough to say, well, I rely on oxygen to live, and it's okay because I'm pretty sure I can have oxygen 98% of days. Like that's not a way to be. And most of us in this room are, probably been in banking long enough to have seen models that were reliant on securitization markets always being available. And then when securitization markets froze up, 15 years ago, we saw a series of failures on the other side of that. And so I think it's very important for leaders, the seniors, the folks in this room to be, I think, constantly asking their teams and going to events like this and thinking about what are the ways in which things can go wrong, and how do we make our business resilient to that, and how do we, have the courage to make the investments that are required for that. Just from a Visa lens for a moment, we aspire to be the best way to pay and be paid anywhere and everywhere in the world. We certainly, we've got a massive consumer business and a growing set of businesses under this new flows umbrella. It's incredibly important to that purpose and to that brand promise that the transactions work every time in a matter of milliseconds, everywhere, every place in the world. And so we invest an enormous amount in trying to have 100% availability. We operate at 6 nines year in, year out, meaning 99.9999% of the time availability. So that's about a second every other week, on average in a year when we will perform. That takes significant investment, and all of us live in worlds of constrained resources. It takes trade-offs against other things that we might want to invest in the short run. So sorry for the long answer, but it's an area of real passion for me.
Well, and just maybe keeping on that theme, we've talked a lot about fintechs within this organization, and we've got a future leaders group that's also been looking at the commercialization of data and the role that non-banks have played and how banks are trying to catch up in many ways as to how we look at data. As an industry, where are we in this cycle? How well have we mastered the use and the commercialization? And I'll say the ethical and responsible commercialization of data.
Yeah, I think we're in very early innings, if I can use a baseball metaphor in an international crowd. I think we're in the very early stages of successfully and responsibly commercializing data as a banking and financial services industry. And I guess my proof point for that would be almost all the profit pools associated with at least consumer data are captured by a handful of tech giants down the road from here in ad tech and advertising and marketing. So I think it's very early days, but enormously promising. So many of the challenges that we in this room face and our clients face have to do with better data capture and reconciliation and, what is that payment for and how do I match that? And, issues that when I was in banking, my clients were constantly struggling with. And I think there's tremendous opportunity with today's technology and burgeoning AI and the revolution that we're on in AI to really, as a banking industry, better harness data for our end customers. And I think there's a space that financial institutions are uniquely well positioned to own, which is to be trusted.
Yeah.
Todd, to your point with their data. Because if you look at consumer research, on this, very few companies and industries are trusted. Banks and financial institutions are trusted with people's financial lives. It's enormously important. And so I think there's an opportunity to own that space about trusted use of data for financial institutions.
Yeah, I see that our Slido has gotten quite active. So
Okay.
I'm actually going to pull one of the questions off of the top, which is, do you anticipate Visa will be looking to also participate in the trade finance space to help bridge the trade finance gap for SMEs? And if I can maybe piggyback on that question, more broadly, what are you hearing from corporate treasurers? And how do they view you relative to how they're viewing perhaps their house banks?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The short answer is we would love to participate, not obviously as a lender, as a creditor, but as an enabler of more efficient, more effective trade finance with better data, better FX execution for cross-border transactions, easier reconciliation. So absolutely seek to participate. Your second question, treasurer, what do I hear? Well, look, that's a big reason for why I and my team are here today, is to hear more about how we can help serve corporate treasury. But what what I have heard so far, I guess, in my own journey is probably several themes. Todd, I wonder if these resonate with you. One is the transformation of the treasury function from one that has been a very important operational function, custodian for cash and balance sheet management, to an even more important strategic partner to grow core businesses and new businesses. And some of the levers I think that at least I hear folks are looking to pull is better liquidity management. We still operate in a world, at least in the cross-border space, which is a big focus of ours, where working capital can be tied up for multiple days. Better and easier reconciliation, again, particularly in the cross-border space, a real challenge. Better FX execution. And so these are some of the capabilities that we're looking to bring to bear to make, help accelerate that treasury transformation to a strategic growth and potentially profit center. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's certainly what I've heard.
Yeah. So I was also just scanning through a couple of questions, and I was thinking to myself, and I'll show my age here a little bit, but I kind of have the Visa commercial on repeat in my head when I think about Visa, right? It's everywhere you want to be. And so we have an incredibly global association, and many of our members are in emerging markets. I know that your organization serves communities everywhere. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the issue of financial inclusion a little bit earlier. And I'm just interested to hear your thoughts on underserved markets, whether they be here domestically or whether they be in emerging market regions. And how do you see that space? Where are they in the process of dealing with disruption and the advancement and adoption of these new solutions and so forth?
Yeah, Todd, you touched on actually one of the reasons I get fired up to, get out of bed every morning, come to work at Visa. Not to, have another Visa advertisement on top of your thank you. I'm very grateful for the everywhere you want to be. But, we're one of a small handful of companies that have, truly global reach. I didn't build this, so I'm not bragging about anything that I did, but we're one of the few companies to have really global reach, and we touch, directly, through our clients, 3 billion sort of endpoints around the world, and then through some of our commercial partners, another 4 billion, endpoints, if you will, consumers, small businesses, et cetera, 7 billion around the world. And the reason I get so fired up about that is, I believe that the digitization of money movement is a good thing for the world, full stop. It's good for consumers, it's good for small businesses, it's good for governments. And so I'm enormously passionate about this topic. So I guess my perspective and answer to your question, Todd, is, what I see around the world is really a remarkable acceleration in the digitization of money movement. And in many parts of the world, and again, I say this as a former longtime banker, I would say that banks have been very focused on serving in the developing world, sort of the top part, of the pyramid, which makes sense from a revenue generation standpoint. But the vacuum, the space that's left open is sort of the bottom half of the pyramid, if you will, and innovators and wallets and tech companies or fintechs, and in some parts of the world, MNOs have stepped into that space, and they're providing financial services. And then they can aggregate enough scale that suddenly those are really meaningful and powerful businesses. And so thinking about, how do you partner with those? If I were, sitting in the audience here, and I'm sure many audience members are, I'd be thinking a lot about, well, how do I partner with those disruptors who've gone out and brought sort of the bottom half of the pyramid into the digital economy? And I think that as I say, I think it's an unalloyed good. I do think that there are some, around the margins. Yeah. There are some costs for sure. There's a lot of de-risking going on in the correspondent banking world, which negatively impacts the client, those banks directly and the clients of those banks. And that's one place where we seek to step in and see whether through our Visa Direct network or through our B2B Connect network, we can reconnect those banks that have been de-risked and do it in a way that's Visa-grade security and compliance, et cetera. But generally, I think, for the good.
Yeah. I was again scanning through some of the Slido questions, and I think piggybacking off of that topic, I want to pose one of them to you. Do you think it is helpful for the industry to have the same regulatory framework for banks and PSPs and perhaps other non-banks in the space?
I saw that question. I was hoping you wouldn't pick that. The same regulatory framework? I guess my answer to that is I'm an amateur regulator, so take this with a grain of salt. I think it's important that there's a regulatory framework when it comes to people's financial lives and businesses' financial lives that is inclusive of all the players in an ecosystem who are handling and, for instance, in some instances, storing and then transmitting money. Does it need to be exactly the same? No, I don't think so. I think custodial banks are in a very different part of the ecosystem than PSPs, but I do think it's important that there is a mature regulatory framework that includes, frankly, all the players. If that makes sense.
It does, and I'll editorialize a little bit here because one of the initiatives that we have underway right now within BAFT is particularly looking at the uneven regulation in the payment space, not just from country to country, but also between banks, non-banks, and others. And certainly, we would certainly welcome input from the likes of Visa into that discussion, because I do think it's an issue that for the totality of the industry, we need to come to some agreement around how we approach that.
Yeah, I think we'd be happy to participate and partner in that. Business models that are, to some extent, like regulatory arbitrage, I don't think are the right ones for the long run.
It's not helpful.
It's not.
I want to pivot for a second, maybe to something a little bit different, but it's also something I think that's important to me. I think it's important for everyone here in this room is we've been talking about this issue of human capital and talent development. And as we talk about that in the context of disruption, I wonder if you've got lessons learned or stories that you can share from your perspective about how you've approached change management with human capital at Visa, and how do you view the marketplace? You know, many of the banks here are concerned about how do they attract talent, retain talent relative to non-traditional financial institutions. What's your views on that?
I think talent, people, you know, is one of the highest leverage, levers, if you will, that any senior leader in any company can pull. So I'm not really saying anything new in that, but it's a critically important topic, and one that I think is hard to spend too much time on. So you asked me a lot in that question. With respect to, what do I look for in, hiring and promotion, et cetera? A number of things, not surprisingly, but more and more, I've tried to narrow that down to curiosity and humility, right? There's so much change going on in the world, and it's happening so fast that I think you've just got to find, people for your team who are just deeply curious. They want to get out there, they want to engage with new technology, they want to figure out, what's the shiny object without, real impact versus what's really going to change our companies and our clients' lives and businesses. They're curious to know about, their clients and their customers. One of the great, I think, changes in the way kind of business operates today versus the beginning of my career is I think all successful companies are much more client-centric than they used to be. You've got to be deeply curious about your clients or your clients' clients in our case. And so curiosity is massively important to me. And then humility is the other side of that. And what I mean by humility is sort of maybe a particular kind of humility. It's humility about what it is you think you know and why it is you think you know it. I think you've got to be constantly asking yourself, do we have the right strategy? Is this really working? What new data can we bring to bear to challenge our deeply held beliefs? Because again, that's a response, I think, a resilience response, if you will, to a world that's changing incredibly fast. So I look for a lot of things, like I say, but I certainly, necessary for me is curiosity and humility. And then, I could keep going, maybe feel free to cut me off, but you asked about change management.
Yeah.
And all of our businesses are gonna, they're transforming today, and they're gonna look different in 10 years than they do today. And it's down to senior leaders like we have in the room to lead the journey at our companies and in our industry through that change. And that's hard for people. Yeah. It's really hard. And I think the things that I go back to are pretty basic. Number one is, we start by making the case for change. Why are we changing? What's the vision? What are we going after? The second thing I'd say is model the way, right? So this is where we're going, and this is why we're going there. And by the way, I think it's important that you speak to the heart as well as the head when you make that case for change. A lot of us will, I need the logical argument, but if you really want to get my buy-in, you've really got to speak to my heart. So make the case for change, model the way, are really important. And then, you've got to have the infrastructure behind that supports that. So you need, processes and systems to help train people. It's not enough to say, I want you to do X differently. You've got to actually invest in the training and development. And then, make sure your performance management, your recognition and rewards line up to support the change that you're trying to drive. So those are some of the things that I keep in mind. But it's a hugely important topic, Todd.
Yeah. You mentioned the word infrastructure, and I was just, again, noting some of the Slido questions. So I'll pass this one to you because obviously on the minds of many of our bankers. So what advice would you provide to banks that have legacy platforms that they've got to maintain, particularly in the face of fintech disruptors and others?
Yeah. Yeah, my advice is like highly prioritize modernizing your legacy infrastructure. I know that it's much easier said than done, and the paybacks can be long, and the journey can be hard. I was at a prior company. We decided that we had a mess of legacy infrastructure, and we just decided, you know what, we're going to do almost no consumer-facing or client-facing changes for a pretty long period of time, because we're going to invest we're really going to invest in cleaning up the legacy infrastructure, and that company, is really keen on getting to the cloud. I think, and at Visa, this is very much a live conversation. We've built our infrastructure that operates, at 6 nines or better, on technology that's been around for a while. And so we're making the hard choices, and we debate this, quarterly. What do we have the resource allocation right to take the amazing capabilities that we have in that core consumer business that I talked about and make sure it's really future-proof? Because it's very tempting to just focus on, the external side, like the client experience, the customer experience, which is hugely important. But I would say, as I said, easier said than done. Incredibly important that you find a path to modernizing your infrastructure, which, by the way, is probably not, for most, doing that on a proprietary basis, right? The good news is there are banking-as-a-service providers out there. It's a very rich space, and possible to ride on a configurable system that others are setting up.
Yeah, great. I want to pull another one of the Slido questions off of here. So, the topic is CBDCs, and I'll maybe broaden that. But what do you think the implications are for banks in particular, if these were to really take hold?
CBDCs. Yeah, it's actually one of the topics I want to talk to folks in this room about, because I'll learn a lot. I think there's a fair amount of truth to what one of the US Fed governors said a couple of years ago, which is we do have a digital dollar. It exists, right? We're all transacting digitally today. So I would say I certainly have an open mind, and it's really important, back to the resilience point, to build optionality into your business. But I'm not sure that there's a displacement risk to the banks via CBDC. I think there's some really interesting use cases that I've seen that talk about digital currencies that have like an expiry, so that if you're in an economy that has, quote, too high a savings rate, you encourage people to spend, et cetera. But again, I think that banks are critical infrastructure for the economies around the world, and I don't think there are any central banks that want to put their own commercial banks out of business. So I think it's about figuring out how do you participate more than it is a threat. But again, that's actually a topic I wanted to talk to folks in some of the breakouts about. Good.
I'm sure they'll be happy to chat about
it.
So
I'd love to hear.
Give you an opportunity to have the last word here. So, dancing with disruption and retooling for success, your final thoughts.
Well, look, we're here because we'd love to partner with you and figure out how we dance together with disruption and reinvent our business models to win for the future. I think that nimbleness and ambidexterity are key. And we've got an exciting time. It's down to us, those of us in the room, to pivot and reinvent our business models to be successful for our clients in the future. The future is ours. We get to write the chapter, and that's why I think this is an amazing time to be in business. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. And I lied because I think I am going to have the last word.
Okay.
But I think you heard from Chris here. He's looking forward to talking with you all. So please seek him out and have a good chat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Enjoyed it.
Okay.